I was asked to talk about the report that we just published just shortly, that's in front of all of you, the After Hurricane Sandy, A Time to Learn and Implement the Lessons in Preparedness, Response, and Resilience. And I'd like to acknowledge one person that's not with Heritage anymore. She just left about a couple weeks ago, Jessica Zuckerman, who was sort of the main push behind this effort. She left to join another company and go do some work for the federal government. So she chose to take her name off the report just to kind of simplify the whole process a little bit. But also David and Sarah, who's down at the end of the table there, obviously everybody knows the people that get listed first don't really do very much. It's all the people that actually do the work. David's the guy who does all the work. And whatever I cover, he'll then say what Steve really meant to say was, and he'll correct me. So he's down there. I asked him to join us to make sure that we actually knew what we were talking about. Look, disaster relief is an interesting bag of cats. Every one of them is different. You'll hear people say that, and it's 100% true. It's also not an excuse for not planning and not practicing them, which some people use that as an excuse for doing that. Every state is different. Every state in our union has a different set of capabilities. Contrary to what some people believe. In fact, just last week I was talking to somebody that, they said, well, FEMA has all this capability. I said, FEMA doesn't have any capability. I said, FEMA is a management organization. It's not like they got FEMA troops lined up ready to go rescue people when some disaster strikes. That's just not the way it is. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, and the Superstorm Sandy is a great example of looking at another major disaster. We've looked at Katrina. Everybody looks at that and thinks that's the model. It is a model. We learned some lessons from that. With Sandy, we've learned some new ones. We've mostly tried to relearn the ones we should have learned from Katrina, but they are different. You'll recognize I'm not from Louisiana, so if I sound prejudiced, please bear with me. I am from New York. I'm sorry that what hit New York and New Jersey and Connecticut was way worse than what hit Louisiana. But the response was just, and it wasn't that the federal response was any different. Actually, the federal response was less in Sandy than it was in Katrina. But the states did not have the same sort of capability, both in management and in personnel. I'm not trying to put the blame on Louisiana for what happened there, but states are different, and they're going to respond differently. So with that, I'll just cover real quickly the main points of our report, and David will add in at the end anything that I miss. First of all, FEMA needs to understand that it is not the be-all and end-all. And everybody else needs to understand that FEMA is not the be-all and end-all. FEMA is there to help. It needs to focus on things that are truly catastrophic and not throw it at every time a tree branch falls down on somebody's pickup truck that FEMA is going to ride in and pay for the whole thing, and we're going to put 150 National Guardsmen on Title 32 and let them come in to help. We used to handle all those kinds of problems at the local and state level. There are methodologies for them to do that. It costs money, and I realize that state and local folks don't have a heck of a lot of money, and because of the response in Katrina, we've sort of gone to this model that we've federalized everything that can even possibly be potentially called a disaster. There's a lot of things out there that need to be handled back at the state and local level, and the Fed should keep track of it. They should watch. They should be ready, but they don't necessarily have to run in and try and be the big brother all the time, because all you're doing is training people to not respond properly. And it also then puts FEMA at a loss when, after they've expended all their assets on these less than true disasters, when a true one hits, they're kind of out of Schlitz, and that's a problem. In Sandy, the one aspect that really worked well was the National Guard and the Coast Guard really stepped up, in some cases basically on their own, and the Coast Guard's part of DHS as well. And there's quite a capability there, but there's also quite a capability down in the Gulf and they really stood up. The Coast Guard has always been sort of a go-to agency. If you've never worked with the Coasties, they're wonderful people. Even their very senior people, you know, are all rolling up their sleeves saying, what do we need to do to get this right? And they do it on a shoestring. They're generally underfunded compared to all the other uniformed services, but they do a heck of a job. The National Guard in this case, at least in New York's case, and I think to a degree in New Jersey, stepped up. They were still on state active duty. They weren't being paid as Title 32. They really, really rolled in. Now, New York has one of the most robust National Guard organizations in the country. They've had National Guardsmen on state active duty in Grand Central Station since 9/11, and they're still there. No federal money going to that program. But New York has said, you know, we've got to do this. So, you know, having a much more effective National Guard organization that is keyed to their domestic mission, not exclusively. New York, New Jersey National Guard folks do all the other things as well, but they're very much aware of their domestic responsibilities, and they were ready to step up in this case. An added one, similar to that, is the state defense forces. New York and New Jersey both have fairly good state defense forces. If you're not familiar with the State Defense Force, because a lot of Americans aren't, in some cases they're called militias. State Defense Force is the generic term for them. New York has a naval one. New Jersey has some naval components to it. They are not National Guard. You're not allowed to federalize them. They work for the governor. In some states they work directly for the TAG. In some cases they work directly for the Director of Public Safety. It's different everywhere, and some states don't have it at all. But in the states that do have it, and in this case the northeastern states all had some, it was an additional set of assets that they could reach out to take care of themselves and not have to depend on others to step in. The next one is that the local communities in this case really did step up. In some cases, you know, to extreme levels of sacrifice, but they were able to do it. People adjusted. People did a lot of ad hoc stuff. You had these wonderful pictures of, you know, like 9,000 cell phone chargers all plugged into a big power strip and running off a generator. They utilized the assets that the feds provided, but they didn't have to turn it over to the feds to do it. You saw some of the military's ROPUs come in, the water purification units. You saw things like that, but a lot of them stayed at the state level using the National Guard. And then the last thing, and I'll stop with this, is that, again, a lot of these lessons, if you go back and read the after-action reviews from Katrina, are exactly the same. We need to stop writing lessons learned reports and putting them on the shelves and never reading the darn things. We do that all across the government. The military, who does lessons learned better than anybody else in the government, and they do the same thing. We have a whole center in the Army for lessons learned, and all we do is store them all. Nobody ever learns from them. But in this case, when you're dealing with the citizens of the United States in these kind of very trying circumstances, you don't need to relearn the lesson every time. Take the lessons, apply them to your organization, your training, your rehearsals, and be ready. I can guarantee whatever you plan will not be exactly what happens. The military learned that a long time ago. We have all sorts of detailed war plans and operational plans, and the real thing is never what happens. But you got a lot better shot at responding quickly and appropriately when you're adjusting off of something you're already comfortable with than when you're just making it up as you go along in the middle of the crisis. And our civilian agencies, I realize it's harder for them to do that. They don't have the kind of culture of rehearsal and practice and training that the military does, but we need to get it, because that's the only way we're going to have the kind of timely responses that we really want, and that's every level of government, not just the feds. We've got to get state and locals back in the game all across the country. In this case, they were there, they played a very good role, but we need to be ready to do that everywhere.